Okay, YouTube, thanks so much. So let's get into the final move that we're going to take within Unit 3. And if we get done within this video, I'm going to question whether we should spread this out over 2 videos. This is going to be the video where things really start to move. Now, there's a couple things I want to keep in place. I want to keep this awful bit of JSON. I don't want to touch it. JSON is just very ugly. And then I want to add a couple of elements up top here that are going to be new. So your first move is you're going to add a div to the top. And part of this talk will deal with what divs are. And the div is going to close right here. And you can kind of gradate this or move, indent this right here. And then I want to create an additional div whose ID is going to be called first div. Okay? And then at the end of that, we're just going to terminate it with a divider. So you've got this opening bit which you need to be mindful of as we go into the demo. Now, part of the problem that we found in our last demo was that using this code, we are successfully traversing or moving across the JSON array. But one of the things that are inadequate is that every time we move through the JSON array, we take the latest item, i.e. the latest row, and we just put the latest row into a given paragraph. So we're constantly overwriting, and we're never accumulating nice data on the page. So our page does not look like Amazon.com. It looks like, the first week of class. So we need to change that. So there's going to be some new skills that we're going to talk about to get there. So I want to save our data that we created right here, and I wouldn't mind saving my output div, and then I'm going to save this console element right here just so we feel like we're familiar. And then within this for each, I'm going to keep this, and then I'm going to kind of empty out my for each, and I'm going to say this is my critical ops are below. Now, commenting is really a great gift to other programmers. But as you go into production, you should be deleting those comments just so it doesn't create a bigger web page, right? The comments are really ways that we communicate with each other. We don't need to divulge our commenting across the, across the internet. I have a lot of security students in the class, so they're kind of mindful of that. That makes sense to them. But I want to create a new variable here called dynamic div. And I just want to set up a get element by ID where I'm actually going to create an element. My bad. So I'm going to go into the document with some apologies, and I'm going to create an element over HTML that's of type div. Now, divs are the most important building block for web pages because they offer large blocks of the web page like its own little web page. So as long as you make a div, you can actually load data into that div separately than other parts of the page. So a div is like a whole other body, if you will, with a whole other dimensions. But we usually stack many little divs on top of each other. And the way that I like to see it is if you go to a very, data-rich, like NPR, depending upon how you like your news, you realize that, and all this is very political, so I'm kind of, cringing as I go through this. It used to be that news was kind of the news. Now the news is politics, right? Like, you kind of choose the news that has the politics that you like, right? So I apologize if this is not your taste. But what's interesting in these big blocks that are happening here? So as I move through this page, this is a big block that's happening here. You see this big block? And the web page is kind of painting the latest data to this block. And that's good. And so as I kind of select that, you realize that it has a div. And that that div is of class story text, and obviously the developers, who for MBR is a very, very esteemed group of developers, their class is called story text. So all of these parameters apply to that div, and of course the div is styled through what's called a cascading style sheet, or a CSS, which we're going to get into in about a month. So just forget about the style sheet. Once you get into the style sheet, you never return. And it's good to get your JavaScript education out of the way before you get CSS, because CSS is another thicket that you'll be fascinated with. But when you see class, the class refers to stuff that's in a CSS file. So it's stuff that you won't deal with yet. It's kind of like ID gets read by the JavaScript, but class gets read by the CSS, the cascading style sheet. The cascading style sheet shows the dimensions of that div. So every given div has computed dimensions, and every div has a padding and a border and a margin, and that's called the box model. And so when you think about a div is a box that some stuff can go in, like a picture or some text or a link to someplace else. And so all your goodies should be put inside of a div. And the only reason why I mentioned div is that NPR wants to be this streaming kind of, it wants to be like BuzzFeed, where stuff is appearing here all the time. It's so distracting. I'm like, don't read the headlines. You won't go forward with the. It's just so delicious to read the news, But you realize that they set up the page so that there's always left hand is the story, and then right hand is the picture, right? And that is the information architecture comprising the page. So that if you ladies, all eyes get on me when I say you guys or you ladies, if you ladies go ahead and architect the page as a series of boxes, then you can begin to program and put content into each of those boxes using getElementById. No sweat. So here's the box. Okay, so that's what you need to understand about div thus far. So that's what we're kind of, get rid of this. Get rid of that web page. So we're going to start to look at this thus far. Now you realize that you've created a div right here. So we're going to go back to the fact that you have two divs in just a minute. But the first thing we're doing is we're going to create an element that's called div. And so that means a new div will appear on the page. That's good. Okay, that's going to help us. So that create element is a new skill. It's something you haven't seen this far. And so the next thing is I'm going to create another variable. It's going to be called the new p for the new paragraph, and that's going to be a document.createElement of type paragraph. And you guys know about paragraphs. Sorry, my Xcode is, this is like twice the size of text as it normally is. So that's the new paragraph. And then I'm going to say I have a new paragraph message, which is going to be saying my data is going to be my item dot last name. And you're already good with what's happening there, which means that you've crossed the chasm and now it's downhill. Does that make sense? The arrays, the for each, that's tough. JavaScript makes it easy, but it's tough. And why don't we say my data is my item last name plus, I don't know, first name, just to make it a more robust demo. And so that's what I want to print to the web page for as many lines as appear within my JSON. Now I'm going to say, well, where do I want to paint it? I'm going to call that my node to paint. And so I'll say I want to put that data within what's called a text node. And I want to create a new text node built upon the new paragraph message. Believe it or not, I have to do this for every line. And that means that I'm going to take this string of data and I'm going to create a new bit of text that will appear on the screen. That'll be called the node to paint. And then what I want to do is I want to take that new paragraph and I want to append an HTML element to that. So I want to take the node to paint and I want to append it to the new paragraph. And so things happen very quickly here. This is an extremely powerful line, which is kind of refreshing because you guys have had to deal with get element by ID and long, messy lines like this. Now finally you have this quick, powerful line where you're going to say, okay, create a paragraph and then put this sentence in there. And then what you want to do is, remember that dynamic div? You have a new div that you're going to create for every line. Return to dynamic div and then append the new paragraph to the div. Now this goes beyond what you already know. So we're adding new lines, not overwriting them with this bit right here. Adding new paragraphs. Now, if you can believe that we have more to do, we have 2 more lines, and then the new stuff is over. I want to create a variable called element where I'm going to go into the document and I'm going to get the element that's called bod, which is going to be the body. And then for that element, I want to append that dynamic div. So that's going to add one more div for every line of data in my JSON package. But the one thing that I need to do, and I'm sorry if I'm going to throw you off by doing this, is the code won't change, but I want to go up to the body. And I want to do something that you're going to understand. I want to give the body an ID of bod. And what this will do is every time we have a new line of JSON, it'll put that line into a paragraph, and it'll put that paragraph into a div, and it'll add that div to the body. Exhaustive, but necessary to get something moving. And that's what you've been asking for in the back of your mind. You're saying, well, that's fine. But real websites have lots of lines, and there's lots of action. So how can I take a lot of data and make it into a lot of action? So before I leave you to code that, let me just check my work and see that I'm making things happen. And you can see that I have the beginnings of a data-driven dynamic website. You can see my console. I'm iterating the objects. So I have data that's moving. And then within each of my elements, what's fascinating is that I have all these new divs. Wait a sec. I didn't code that div. I didn't code that div, and I didn't code that div. My JavaScript did it for me. And using this structure, and you're going to have to study this, it automatically built the content using this raw package that came from the internet. Okay, so let me just go through this one last time before I kind of let you loose. This is going to be the new code. And let's just have a little fun with it. I've got a little screenshot right here. Kind of make this our business right here. And let's let's kind of annotate by drawing a few lines here. you can begin by creating a new div. Now, this is not the ID. This is just the div in itself. And the div is this thing right here. So it'll create a new div. And there's no ID associated there yet. And then I'm going to create an element that's a paragraph. And then I'm going to set this message. So this message is now what's called a text node. But then I'm going to put that text node inside of my paragraph. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that paragraph and I'm going to put it in the div that I created just a minute ago. And then I'm going to take that div and I'm going to append it into the body. So if you're okay with creating an element and then appending an element, you're going to do great. Okay, that's the two big pieces right there. And it's a pretty exhausting lesson because every line is doing something new, right? But first you're going to create an element, be it an HTML element such as a div or a paragraph. Then you're going to create a text node which contains raw data, from here. And then you're going to append. And once you're finished with that, and this is just a quick screenshot, once you're okay with that, you realize you'd append to your website. And so JavaScript is doing a lot of the automated problem solving. You figured out your algorithm once, and now it'll run a billion times, solving people's problems many, 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 many times. Okay? Now, with this YouTube, I don't mean to be exhaustive. I just want to put something out there, and I want to say, okay, watch this YouTube a bunch of times. But what's also cool is that with every given div that I select, each of them has a box model that has the inner content, padding, border, and margin, all of which we can style. So as you look at the, let's go back to NPR, if you can stomach it, you realize that, all these very, goodness gracious stories happening, like, oh, that's awful. You realize that there's a border and a margin and a padding, and that they're coloring those three elements so to give it some personality, okay? And so you're like, well, that's easy because the web looks like this very diverse, very, differentiated place, but all of them are just divs with different styling and a different font. The font is big. If by the end of this class you're getting into fonts, great. Don't have to. We'll tell you how to make nice looking fonts. And then we'll leave it at that. Frankly, the big deal here is getting that data. So few people deal with this. But the tiny number of developers on planet Earth who do deal with this, they usually do big things because they work with big slabs of data. So what I want to say to you is be the developer. Be the courageous one. Believe that you're outstanding. Believe that you're going to do just fine. But master the demons, right? The arrays, and then the for loops. That's the demons. You already got the tough part, which is the get element by ID. That's hard, right? You've crushed that. Now your next assignment is to crush the array and to run that array through the for each. And then as you move through the for each, you're kind of working with creating new HTML elements. You're kind of creating all your elements up here and then appending them into the document object model, into the map of nodes that are already present within the page. So really great stuff. Now, just so that you all know, so you can research this more, these are going to be JavaScript nodes. That idea of nodes means that JavaScript can control the document object model and can place new nodes within that graph of existing HTML elements and therefore add new content to the page when appropriate, which is controlling what the user is seeing, right? Controlling the information, controlling the visible, right? The power structure in itself. So I hope that's fun, and I hope you watch this video a bunch of times and, Get me some ad revenue. Kidding. And you get a good run of it. All right. YouTube out.